what's happening in Silicon Valley. Let's go over here. Let's buffer up this video. And hang on one sec while this thing buffers. It was buffered, it's buffered again. So let's talk a little bit about what I call the privacy revolution, which is just starting. So you guys are all part of this, you know, and on the technology side, I want to just, you know, come clean, right? So I'm the CEO of MeWe, I'm the founder of MeWe. I don't code. So I'm not an engineer, I'm more of a visionary, you know, CEO executive. I write in Huffington Post about privacy. I have an extensive column there. Sir Tim Berners-Lee is one of the advisors of MeWe. He's a shareholder in MeWe. He's an advisor. Tim and I both think that privacy is critically important. But you know, I want to have this conversation today about really, even if we think that, does it matter, and what can we do about it? So first, let's watch a quick little. This is a 1-minute video. See if we get the volume right.
This is our time. We play without limits. We create without rules. We are not for sale. We connect with the whole world. Every idea we've shaped, every relationship we've cultivated belongs to us. We demand the freedom to be our uncensored selves. And when something challenges that, we change it. Together. This is our time. One, two, three. Let's start a revolution. Let's MeWe. Join the revolution at MeWe.com.
Cool. That is an introduction to what I've sort of devoted my whole life to for the last 4 years. In 2010, when Mr. Zuckerberg said privacy is a social norm of the past, I don't know if any of you watched the video, but there's an interview where Mark Zuckerberg says we just changed the privacy policies for 350 million people. Privacy is a social norm of the past. Having been one of the early founders of social media, I built a company called Supergroups, Superfamily.com, Superfriends.com in 1998. We were PC Magazine top 100 company then. I got a little pissed off because just like Tim Berners-Lee, who invented the web, he's the true inventor of the World Wide Web, just like as Tim invented it so that communication could happen, the idea was that communication could happen, not that the whole world could spy on us. So, not that privacy would become something of the past. So anyway, that's what I'm doing today. And I put this screen up with the Fourth Amendment today, just sort of, and thank goodness that the founding forefathers of the United States, you know, saw something like this to be important. They had no idea that this amendment would become pivotal to a conversation, you know, nearly 300 years later, 240 years later. So, but this is really, you know, sort of the linchpin that everybody is sort of standing on right now, is does the Fourth Amendment have teeth? And beyond that, you know, the early founders of democracy never envisioned that it would be corporations that would be on the front lines of, you know, of egregious data mining and spying and sharing data about us in ways that are really unforetold. And I know some of you in the room manage data. Managing data is really important because there are obviously some really great uses of data and very important uses of data. So, you know, what's happening in the world is, you know, what our conversation is about today. So, now, you know, when we look at the line that's been crossed, you know, and you don't have to dig too far to look at what's happened with Google, you know, in their whole, and I've written a lot about this in HuffPost too, but these are the data, all the data up here is from, Wall Street Journal, great sources. But we all know these are factual. Google's been fined many times actually around the world for, sort of breaking the law, spying. When they did Google Maps, I don't know if you guys know this, but when they drove around mapping out our houses in the world, which is a great tool, they also rather intentionally stole our passwords and our networks and things like that. And they got, they were caught, they were fined, tens of millions of dollars for that. In fact, most recently they were fined, I think, a year and a half ago in Germany for that. So, there's still a sort of a tail to the court cases around that. We know last year Facebook, did their psychological experiment, but we also know that if you're using Facebook or Google, that they're what's called curating your feed because they know everything about you. So even on a search, if you and a buddy do a Google search, you're going to get a different hierarchy of results based on what Google knows about you and what they think you're going to find most interesting. So it's not, a nice, clean, impartial search anymore. So even our information, same thing at Facebook. You guys probably know this. And I use the word guys for men and women in the audience, so thank you for, being patient with me when I just say you guys. But Facebook curates our feed every day. So, they're always adjusting what you see on your wall, what you see in your groups, based on the algorithms they have analyzing you personally. So there's been some real changes here, but the challenges of data go farther. Just in terms of the open communication, kids are bullied. Social media sites are used for sex trafficking. Bad guys use social media because it's so open. College admissions, employers, and some of you might also employ it. After all, the data's there. And so, we're researching people we're working with, people we're dating, people we're looking at hiring, et cetera. So there's obviously a lot of data, and then there's unfortunately some negative results to this open world. Kids, almost 50% of kids get cyberbullied. And so some of these open platforms, even the newer ones like Yik Yak, which is really the rage. I don't know if Yik Yak's taken off in Canada, but these anonymous apps, which are, can be a lot of fun, but also there's a downside to it. Cyberbullying is very real, and if any of you have children, and we all were once children ourselves, you know that bullying is very real, and it happens. And today with social media, it can happen in a lot more nefarious ways, unfortunately. So, online tracking is a very real thing. Most of us know about it, are involved in it. The amount of data, is staggering to most people outside of this room. So, we're in the room together. Most of you know and may even be involved with data management, security management, hack management, so you know how much data there is today. The consumer really doesn't understand when we tell them that there are 1,500 points of data about each one of us that are being transacted, with the data brokers. That's a really remarkable data point. I'm not even sure what 1,500 points of data on any of us could look like, but it's there. The way we shop, the way we think, the topics we look at, the searches that we do, everything about us, everywhere that you spend money and anything you're looking at. It's incredible. So what we end up with is the whole world is now worried about privacy, and the press has done a remarkable job of heightening this. So where 2 years ago, how many of you maybe have teenagers as kids, right? So, several people, a bunch of people in the room. Now, 2 years ago, if I said to you, are your kids worried about privacy at all? 100% would have said no way, they don't care. Today, the numbers are creeping up. It's not really a creep. It's actually pretty remarkable. It's somewhere between 30 and 50% of young people have a much greater awareness. And in that bank, many of them think that Facebook has become creepy or something, like that, and they're worried about it. And then if you have younger kids, 13, 14, 15, that's actually the generation that is emerging as privacy aware from the get-go. So There's a lot, and I also threw up the study here, the Princeton study, the Facebook study, Princeton University did. And how many of you have heard about this study before? It's not new news. It's been out for over a year now, and Facebook spent millions of dollars in public relations to undermine the study. But in the meantime, I think the best evidence is their acquisition of Instagram a few years ago, WhatsApp, et cetera. So they're playing offense because they know that this is going to happen. So it's an interesting phenomenon as we watch. Princeton actually used a disease model to look at how a disease replicates and then disappears from a culture. And also they studied what happened to MySpace. So now we all know, and I believe that Facebook is not going to fail. They're a big company, they have deep pockets. But I think Facebook, the way we know it, is going to change rapidly as Facebook has become uncool. And uncool is what actually killed MySpace. So as soon as you didn't have to be there, as soon as it was no longer cool to be there, there's this rapid fall off, which is what the Princeton study analyzed. So it's very interesting, just to watch whether in fact this happens. They predicted that sometime later in 2015 it would start, and then it would be very rapid. But we'll see what happens. I just find it to be a very interesting study, especially in light of the fact that most Facebook users don't trust Facebook, and for good reason. I just wrote an article last week in Info Security about their most recent privacy policy change, where they went to this plain English, and we'll talk about that later. It's coming up in the slides, so that they could get more data from us. Now, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, really an incredible man, truly a genius. If you ever have a chance to meet with him, see him, Tim is really, he's very heroic. And he's also, in his career, he's continued to work in sort of the nonprofit world. He hasn't egregiously monetized his invention. It's all shared with the world, of course. And Tim is calling for this Magna Carta about, what can we do? He wants a web where he's not spied on, where there's no censorship. And, I'm a strong advocate, for what Tim believes in. And he became an early beta tester of MeWe and started sending us, feedbacks. And we were like, no way, couldn't possibly be Tim Berners-Lee. So, we would get these feedbacks. Through our feedback loop, we were encouraging our beta users to send us all this feedback. And we started getting feedback from a guy, Tim Berners-Lee. So, and, our engineering team, we would talk and go, couldn't be, but we have to be polite. So whoever this guy is, we'll give him a nice, pleasant, a response, and which we did. And this guy kept on sending us feedback. And one of the first things that this fellow asked for was downloadable content, but easily downloadable. Like take your content with you every day, and have it just disappear off our servers as fast as possible. So, and we built that. And then last year on, it was March 11th, 2014, Tim did an interview on CNET, and it was a print interview. And the only company he talked about was our corporation. It's called Scruples, which is what we did our beta project under that brand. And we were like, oh my God, that's Tim Berners-Lee. He's talking about us. That was Tim Berners-Lee giving us feedback. So we got in touch with Tim, and today he's a key advisor as we look at important things to do with technology at MeWe and the preservation of privacy, if such a thing exists, which we will continue to talk about this morning. Now, the other Tim has jumped into the fray. So anybody Apple users, anybody iPhone, Mac, right? So, and frankly, I was a Windows guy because Microsoft isn't too bad on privacy. If you look at the relativity of privacy, the Googles, the Facebooks, and recently, Mr. Cook has become an outspoken advocate, vocal advocate for privacy. And I had the fortunate, happenstance to meet Tim, immediately after which I went to the Apple store Um, hence the MacBook Pro that's right here. This is he's a remarkable man, and the really great thing about Tim Cook is he believes what he says. He was very clear with me that he believes everything that he's saying about privacy, and he's going to steer that ship correctly when it comes to the data mining. And I don't know if you guys saw this. I wrote a lot about this in my HuffPost column about the battle in the United States that ensued when Tim Cook, made this statement, and then Eric Schmidt got really pissed off. So Eric Schmidt went on CNBC's Squawk Box and criticized Cook's products and said he didn't know what he was talking about. And then Mark Zuckerberg also got into it. You can, if you're ever curious to see that, just an FYI, you can just Google me. Use DuckDuckGo. Look for me at DuckDuckGo or XQuick. And at HuffPost, just go to HuffPost and do a search for me, and you can see these really fun stories about Tim Cook, Eric Schmidt, and Mark Zuckerberg. And I really respect Tim Cook because he's not afraid to speak his mind. So, and he didn't boycott President Obama when President Obama came to Silicon Valley about a month ago, like Zuckerberg and Schmidt did. He went and spoke his mind about privacy again. So, at least we've got a champion in Silicon Valley right now, on one of the big platforms. We know what's happening. So the nefarious, spying, from your phones to your televisions to Nest inside your house, to the OBD2 computers inside your cars. So, to the cameras outside on the streets, there's a lot of data about us everywhere today. And I think, most of you may have followed the story recently with Samsung and LG, where they, they were listening, not just watching, but they were listening, and they were feeding, so they were listening inside your house and giving all that voice data to third party, supposedly to analyze for purposes of voice commands for the TV, but they pushed it outside of their company, these voice packets, and they could turn it on and off at will. So there's a lot of this going on. There's also this whole conversation about new kinds of cookies. So because cookies are easy to identify, we've got a really cool little app on our homepage called the MeWe Challenge, where you sort of click and say, are you using LinkedIn, are you using Google, are you at Pinterest, are you at Instagram, and how many cookies are just following you right there. So companies are getting savvy to how easy it might be now to start blocking cookies. Lots of places that can do it, even a browser like Tor can do it. So there are new ways, and some of you might even be helping engineer these things, because there's part of our conversation this morning is about technology and whether it has an integrity compass, a moral compass, or not. So what happened recently? How many of you know that Facebook made a change their privacy policy now? In America, we have this incredible sport called, a sporting event, the Super Bowl. And the Friday before the Super Bowl, Facebook made a change their privacy policy. How many of you guys actually know that? So, a few, and you guys, right, in our industry, I would expect that. Most people in the world don't realize, they think their privacy policy changes came much earlier in January. But in fact, this was a very interesting one, because when Facebook acquired WhatsApp, the Federal Trade Commission sent Zuckerberg and Coom a letter, the CEOs of the companies, and said, you're not allowed to share this data in this deal. So, and if you do, we're going to come after you. So they sat on it for a long, long time, and now they made this very discreet, what's called a plain English change to their policies, which actually allows them to start scraping data from WhatsApp, get more data from Instagram, et cetera, and be within the parameters of their own policies, and sort of sidestep the Federal Trade Commission letter. So this is what we published news about last week in Info Security. So it's a fascinating change. But people should really recognize that at Facebook, and this is what we have to sort of educate the world, at Facebook we're not the customer. we're the product. So when you shift your context of who are we, when we go to the restaurant tonight, we're the customer. We're not the product that they're selling to the food vendors. So we're actually the customer that they've got to prepare and serve us and take care of us so that we come back. But at Facebook, we're the product that they sell to the marketers. And once you understand that contextual shift, everything starts to make sense more about what happens at Facebook, also what happens at Google Plus and Google Plus. Anybody using Google Plus? Okay, 2, 3, 4. But Google Plus was really, there was a lot of journalism reports written when Google Plus launched that it was actually purely a data play. And, at this point, it's one of those RIP products that Google's launched over the years. They just, I don't think, have the courage to actually shut it down. But there are very few people using it. Hangouts were cool if the technology would just work great. But beyond that, Google was really, and their internal documents show this too, it was just about data because that's what these companies are about. These guys are data brokers. And, of course, data is big business. And I know some of you guys here, are using data. And there are good ways to use data. We're going to talk about this. Now, here's some false promises around privacy. Trustee. How many of your companies are trustee certified? Show of hands. Anybody's companies? Trustee certified, terms and conditions, privacy policies. Good. I'm glad your hands are down. Because as it turns out, the trustee certification is not worth a hill of beans. They were fined by the Federal Trade Commission about 4 months ago. These are actually headlines of some of my columns in Huffington Post. The FTC came down on trustee, said that they actually never looked at thousands of privacy policies and terms and conditions. They just kept on giving them their renewal certificates. So, Snapchat, Path, etc. Same thing. So, unfortunately, when we've been sold a bill of goods on privacy, it hasn't come true. So, Snapchat, you guys know, you're technical. Most of you can probably hack into the phone and find all those sexting, pictures and share them with some of your other friends. So, privacy in the news, this is, again, the media keeps talking to us about it, and so, part of our jobs, everybody in here is in privacy and security. What do we do with all this information? How do we explain this to our friends? How do we make people feel comfortable about what's happening and what is happening? And so this is just a sample of, some of the articles that are out in the news, some things that I've written also. And then, here's the, my HuffPost column here. So let's scroll back up for a second, and what I want to do is we'll park it right here, and let's talk about whether privacy really matters. So, first of all, sorry, I got some notes there. How many of you think that privacy actually is important? And don't worry whether you think it's dead or not. Okay. So privacy is important, let's say 90% of the room. And the other 10% have coffee in their hands. So now how many of you think that privacy still exists? Does privacy exist? Great, okay. And that's the 10% that didn't raise their hand before. So really what we've got is most of us in the world think that privacy is important and in this room. And in fact, maybe 25% of us today think that privacy still exists. So now that's that can be a real challenge for the future. So the question, and therefore, the question for us, and this is a really important question. This is why Tim Berners-Lee joined MeWe. There's an inflection point in the history of the world, and it's right now, and we're in it. And that is the question of, it's up to us to actually do something about this, or it's up to us just to decide if there's something to do about it, if privacy matters. So now, what you guys just said is, yes, privacy matters, and no, I don't think I have much of it anymore. and this is what concerns Tim and myself and probably most people in the room, is what can we do? Especially in the headline this morning, front page of the Vancouver newspaper is the NSA spying on Canadian corporations, never mind everybody else in the world that they're spying on. So here we are in this conversation about, does privacy matter, and how has the opening up of the world changed things? So back in Mark Zuckerberg's been talking about it, and Facebook and Eric Schmidt, and it's much bigger than them, right? The open world. The promise of the internet was this open connectedness, so which we thought was really kind of cool. We can talk to everybody around the world. We can get real-time information. Twitter is great for that, by the way, right? Real-time, what's happening, much faster than a newspaper can get it to us. And open, as Zuckerberg said, open means having access to more information, more transparency, being able to share things and have a voice in the world. And connected is helping to keep people in touch, maintain empathy for each other around the world, and bandwidth. So and we look at things like the Haitian earthquake in 2010, where the openness has helped us immensely. The victims couldn't speak English, right? They could, they only spoke Haitian Creole. So Microsoft, in 5 days, this information quickly got to Microsoft. The information transmitted so quickly, and Microsoft, very heroically, in a 5-day, less than 5 days, created a machine translation service that was then implemented, in this sort of open world of being able to serve, emergency crises around the world through machine learning. And they were able to then to listen to the victims. The rescue workers right there could understand what the victims were saying about their injuries and about their pains, and all of a sudden communication could happen, which is critical to saving lives. So machine learning, has made airport screening, more effective in terms of, looking at the data analysis of who's buying what kind of a ticket. Is it a one-way? Did you just buy it? Did you pay cash for it? Creating algorithms that can get to that quickly, so that those of us who can be TSA certified can get through very fast, and someone who might be more suspicious has to take a different route. Machine learning is letting us predict outcomes of political elections with great accuracy. It's kind of like, sometimes I find it's a little scary when you realize that you're just a statistic. When you see your life unfold, and you're sort of following the herd, safety fraud programs. Some of you may be involved with eBay or Amazon, and their safety fraud programs through machine learning have been great at identifying the fraudulent users, etc. So and even people in third world countries, communist countries, oppressive regimes, were able to post things to share with the world what their experience is like, so we could actually discover that we can help change. So there are benefits to the openness of the world. There are benefits to this data being out there, and then we look at somebody like Julian Assange. You guys are familiar with Julian Assange. He's world renowned. Whether and I often talk about these guys like Snowden, Assange, even Mr. Zuckerberg. I respect Mr. Zuckerberg. What a great businessman, what a visionary, and what an incredible company. You can't argue with Facebook with 1 billion+ members in the world, and what they've done for people. So, but the question is that, as Julian Assange said in December, he said that this idea, the concept of the internet, a single global homogeneous network that enmeshes the world, is the essence of a surveillance state. The internet was built in a surveillance-friendly way, and that's how it's evolved. And there may have been alternatives, but they were ignored. And so what we're looking at is there wasn't a lot of foresight. And when we have this discussion this morning, part of our 2 hours together, we're going to have a discussion about what can we do. What is it that we can do together, if anything, without being too cynical, because we really want to look at it's our opportunity. At this point, the internet is only 25 years old. in the history of the world, 25 years is nothing. So I look at a company like Facebook that's 10 years old, almost 11 years old, in a 25-year-old, now 26-year-old internet. And in the history of companies, they're probably like a 100-year-old company. So, when you look at that ratio of the internet's just 25 or 26 years old. So there's a lot we can do. So part of what I want is, as our conversation today, as we look at this, is putting cynicism aside, what are the opportunities for us? Because technology is amoral. And think about it. I would consider almost everybody in the room a technologist, an inventor, really a modern genius. So I want you guys to think of yourselves as that. Whatever job you're in, I always, I've talked about, we're always the CEO of our lives. And I've written some books on greatness and how, we all define our greatness. But we're also the geniuses because, we're the engineers, we're the change agents, we're in the trenches, we have opinions about what's right and wrong, and technology does not have an opinion about what's right and wrong. So technology is technology. So we can't fault it. There's nothing wrong with technology. There's nothing inherently evil about technology. Technology is not even inherently good. It's all how we use it. It's all how we apply it. So, we want to look at this, the idea that, it could be that it's mindless and moving. Google Glass. That's just technology moving. Self-driving cars, that's technology moving. These incredible phones that we have. The dirt boxes that are in the news, were in the news yesterday again. You guys know what a dirt box is? It's or a stingray. More common phrase is stingray, but in the United States we call them dirt boxes. And that's actually, in the press, that's actually what we call them, which is, these dummy, machines that, that mimic a cell phone tower and get your cell phone wherever you are to send the signal up to it. And now, police departments around the United States are attempting to, to get these dirt boxes. And the problem with a dirt box or a stingray is that they spy on everybody. The idea is that they're going to be tracking the bad guys that are around, and that's what the federal marshals proposed to the Justice Department when the Justice Department approved, in sort of a backroom way, approved the use of these. But the problem is they actually get data on virtually every American, on where you are, where your cell phone is, and your movements. So, but again, that's just a use of technology. Technology in and of itself doesn't have this moral compass, doesn't have a privacy compass, doesn't have an integrity compass. And so one of the things we've got to look at is, how in the world can we give it that compass? In November, I was on 2 panels at the GMIC conference, and I moderated one panel on education apps. Anybody involved in education apps here? So, okay, all right, that's good. So you then won't be offended when I tell you, this conversation on the panel, because I asked the panelists, you're developing education apps, that's great, because, we want to use technology to teach our kids. Now, what's your primary objective? And the primary objective is to keep the kid on the app as long as possible. Now, is that really good for our children, for us? Is that good for a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old to be on an app as long as possible? But the kid doesn't realize that, right? Right. And neither does the parent. And they're being sold to us as this is good for your child, and there's some benefits, even in the gaming world. The gamers. Anybody gamers in here? Yeah. All right. So you want to put something fun and interesting and somewhat educational, and then it just depends on the engineering team and the product people. If there's actually some kind of value, and then of course we're deciding what that value is, and if that value is real or not is up to us to say that it is or not. But this is that amorality of technology and also capitalism. So, because capitalism is a fascinating economic structure, it's really amoral. And there's no better place to see that than in China. Anybody been to China? You know, China, I mean, they are incredible capitalists. They're great. And because their government, they're very autocratic, so they don't really have a say in the political direction of their country. So they just get to be capitalists. They get to be amoral capitalists. They follow the law somewhat. The government is relatively, you know, with all due respect to China, it's well known that, you know, the government is somewhat corrupt. There's a lot of money in the government in relationships. China's a relationship, you know, sort of capitalist endeavor. So very different from North America. You know, the Chinese are all about their social relationships and you know, patting each other on the back for capitalism. But it's fascinating when you look at the amorality of capitalism, which leads to, you know, one of the most polluted countries in the world. And again, pollution, the environmental degradation, these things can be fixed by technology, but they also can be caused by technology. This is that amorality of technology. So one of the guys on my team likes to call the internet our frenemy. So, and I don't know if you guys have heard that phrase before. It's like our friend and our enemy at the same time. And I think people have started to see social media that way. You know, cameras, cell phones, dirt boxes. You know, it's great for communication. It's lousy for invasive behavior, for bullying, for stealing our information, tracking our movements. TVs listening to us, you know, cars. Your car knows exactly where you were and when you went over the speed limit. You know, it just does. And insurance companies are now trying to get that information. I don't know if you got it here, but in America, you know, you can like go to a company called Progressive, and you can get them to do a plug-in. Really, they're plugging into your OBD2 computer, which Canadians and Americans have in their cars by law, and they know everything about what you're doing when you're driving that car. So this is before the anonymous car drives us itself. So, you know, it's maybe it's gotten a little too far. And remember, I'm a technology guy. I love technology. You know, MeWe is, you know, a great technology platform. We're designing it to be, Forbes already called us the next generation of communication technology. So, you know, and that's, and we're not marketing, by the way. So, you know, MeWe is still an engineering team, 30 people on an engineering team, just working, making the product great, because we think what the world wants is a great product. It's not the Bill Gates days. If you guys are old enough to remember Bill Gates, most of you are. He's still alive, of course, but and most of you who are involved in rolling out product, you know today consumers don't tolerate, you know, poor products, buggy products. Bill Gates was really lucky in that regard. I have great respect for Bill Gates, and I think he lived in that era. You know, he was a businessman in that era when you could roll out really bad product and people stuck with you. I mean, wouldn't that be a dream? You know, for all, because everybody in here is engineering and security. You know, you guys are all, how many of you are in your own companies? Show of hands. So a lot of entrepreneurs in the room. So, and you guys know this, right? It's, you know, you can't, whether your customer is a corporation or an individual, you've got to deliver a great product today. Otherwise, you know, you don't have a second chance. So, and digital profiles today, you know, are used more, right? So, you know, healthcare.gov uses it. You guys know in America, healthcare.gov, Obamacare, there are clauses in their privacy policy. So this is how far it's gone. Healthcare.gov sometimes collects and uses your personally identifiable information, PII, if you made it available through third-party websites. I'm reading this because these are direct quotes from healthcare.gov's privacy policy. So if you have an account with a third-party website and choose to like, friend, follow, or comment, certain PII associated with your account may be made available to healthcare.gov based on the privacy policy of the third-party website and your privacy settings within that website. That's unbelievable. So, but this is how transparent the government is, but no one is reading, you know, the 20-page privacy policy of healthcare.gov. But what they are saying is that if you're complaining about your back at Facebook, if you're Googling about a mental issue or a physical issue, if you're doing anything, if you're having a beer with your friends and there's a picture We've got it. And we may decide about your health worthiness, etc., based on that. Also, we all know that banks are doing that today also. Banks are deciding whether you can get a loan, not based on how good you pay your bills, but based on who you hang out with, based on who your friends are. And this is now becoming part of your credit score and also becoming part of the assessment of a bank. Now, this is real, right? You guys know about this. Show of hands, right? You know about this? Yeah, a few people do. This is real, right? And some of you may even be involved in this because the data is there. And we're just finding new ways of using the data. So the challenge is technology is growing so fast, it's out of control, and we have to, look at, well, what are we going to do with all this amazing technology and this question about the preservation of privacy. So why is privacy important, since we think that it is? In the American government, there was something called the Federalist Papers, way back when, in the 1700s. At the end of the 1700s, early 1800s, the founding fathers, these were published anonymously. That could never happen today. You couldn't publish something anonymously. When Nelson Mandela met with de Klerk, Mandela was in jail for so many years, and for 5 years, the president of South Africa came to meet Mandela in jail. Nobody knew about it. That couldn't happen today. So, this something we call the wisdom of privacy. Privacy, it's hotly debated. It's polarizing amongst ourselves. Does it matter? People say, I don't care. I have nothing to hide. But what if nothing to hide had nothing to do with it? And what if, we're so blessed, right, because we live in democracies. What if you live somewhere else that's not a democracy, but of course, we impact the whole world with what we do, and we're not even looking at that. So what if you're living in a country with an authoritarian regime, somewhere where prejudice and oppression are common, and they get data about your health, about your DNA, about your political views, about your religious views, about your secret views that you're not speaking out to the world in public the way they can see it, but based on what they can get, the data that they can get. This is very real. So, and this is happening, and this is one of the problems with amoral technology and data collection. It also, in America, we know that the IRS targeted the Tea Party a couple years ago. So, and it's sort of like, well, wait a minute, were they really doing something wrong? And they're just getting data, and then they could find out who's involved from data, and then they could target members of the Tea Party. So, if even in democracy, which is actually not the most perfect government, right? Because there's all kinds of influences there, and they're run by people. Data can be used the wrong way. So, this is where we look at, the courts. This is why I kept the Fourth Amendment up here, because this is almost like what we've got as our grounding, even though it was written, really to protect from British soldiers being in your house, going through your things. That's actually where this amendment is sourced originally, and that's where it came from. But we look at, in December 2013, Judge Leon said that our founding fathers would be aghast at how the government today encroaches on our personal liberties when he made a ruling against the NSA. Now, I just want to dispel a myth about data being so effective at uncovering bad guys. So in November, I was at the PII. Any of you gone to the PII, Privacy Identity Information Conference? It's a great conference, and James Dempsey was there. He's a key member of the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board in America, which is responsible for oversight of the nation's counterterrorism programs. Now here's what he said. When I hold this, because I've got to read a quote directly. So James said, following the NSA's telephony spying program, the Section 215 bulk telephony metadata program, after 13 years of spying and data collection, has not uncovered one bad guy, not uncovered one bad guy that we did not already know about. 13 years. All the phone records of all Americans. 13 years. Not uncovered one bad guy that we didn't already know about. So, when we look at this overuse, we look at these stingrays, these dirt boxes, we look at the over-reliance on data. And we also know from the Boston Marathon bomber that we were alerted, but our resources are so spread out, that we're using so many resources to analyze data instead of using, more traditional, methods of identifying bad guys. So when somebody, one of the Boston Marathon bombers, one of the fathers, walked into one of our embassies and said, my son's a problem. You got to watch him. We didn't have the resources to follow up on it. So, and I don't know if you guys, anybody see the article in the New York Times on Sunday or see it retweeted, 1,000 places about Mark Zuckerberg and privacy? So, all right, so the New York Times, which is big in America, and there's this conversation about all the guys in Silicon Valley, and I live there too, but we're a startup, so we live in a little dinky rented house startup, that classic idea. But they all get NDAs signed by anybody who works on their house, and Mark Zuckerberg's being sued by one of the vendors, and as his lawyer wrote to the other lawyer, he says, and this is a quote, "As your client knows, Mr. Zuckerberg goes to great lengths to protect the privacy of his personal life." So that got tweeted all over the world. That's like, okay. And also, have any of you seen Terms and Conditions May Apply? Great movie. Good. I'm glad a bunch of you have seen this. Cullen Hoback is a MeWe advisor. He's a good friend of mine. It's an incredible film on how we've given away our privacy and what's happened. And he chases Mr. Zuckerberg around with a camera. It's really fascinating to watch him do this. So it's on Netflix now. It won a lot of awards. It's a really brilliant film on what happened when we weren't paying attention, because we didn't intentionally do this, right? How many of you, really intentionally gave up all of your privacy? We might have agreed for something, but how many of you, when you're using Google, knew from the start that Google was actually, reading every word in your emails? Knew from the start. Okay, and that's, like 4% of the room knew from the start. So, but for the rest, for the average consumer, they still actually don't know. Even though Google's admitted it, it's in their terms and conditions, but people don't really understand this, because it's different when, there's a creep that you can't see. So, but, our grandparents and our great-grandparents would have never, ever allowed, a creep, a stranger to follow us around and learn everything about us. It would have never happened. Right. Exactly. Right. It started, that's right. Thank you. What's your name? Brody? So what Brody just said is sort of back in the day, the exchange, we didn't even understand what the exchange was. We just thought that they were, innocuously looking at, and sort of helping to make our email better, more relevant. But we didn't really understand the scope that, they were actually reading every word, and that this would now actually push outside of their system into actually the whole world. And this is where you can delete an email. You can delete something you're writing, a post on Facebook when you're not finished with it. And you guys know we're in the technology business, but Facebook's already captured it. So that's already living forever. I mean, way beyond your lifetime and my lifetime. That's forever. So, what to do? So there's the thing that I call the wisdom of privacy. So, privacy is actually inherently important, is what I think. obviously, right? Even though this question of does privacy matter, and we saw early on, it matters to virtually everybody in the room. So the question for us is, what to do about it? And I want to show you, so, when MeWe says we're private, let's just take a look at, so this is where, Ann Kevorkian, with her Privacy by Design program, when she was running that, gave us. So here's a quick something about us. So if you look up supergroups, you'll see who we were. Something about the books. Dr. Wolf is my partner. He's a really cool guy. So he runs the engineering team. He was my number 3 hire in 1998. He's a PhD in neuroscience from Penn. He's a chaos theory expert. He's a fractal expert. He's very, very cool. These are just a couple of books that I've written on greatness, which, by the way, I don't define, so don't worry. I have no idea what greatness is. For each one of us, it's very individual. So when we start to define, how do we explain what privacy is? We're not going to talk about MeWe per se. I just want to talk about what we believe privacy is. So privacy to us is that you own your content. We don't own it. We have no claim over it. So different than the other companies. So we're not a data company, which is very interesting, in this data world. We don't use facial recognition. We don't look at your loves and your likes. We don't look at your friends. We don't have a data packet on you. We have nothing. Our sessions are encrypted. It's right now impossible. So if any of you guys crack the nut on encrypting, 100 people in a group coming in from disparate points around the world sharing documents and videos and photos, right now that's so cumbersome to encrypt. The best encryption are really the one-to-one or behind a firewall. And you delete your account anytime. This is what privacy is, and also this is what privacy is. So we're the first company in the world, so part of the visionary part of this is, never mind the company, but this is what we think people should be doing. I've met with the chairwoman of the Federal Trade Commission, Edith Ramirez. I've met with some of the other commissioners. If we change our privacy policy, there's a clause that says we're going to tell you and give you a link to delete your account every time we change our privacy policy. So, we think that's ethical business. Why should we be able to just change and say, by the way, you can see the changes over here, and here's a little pop-up message that we changed our privacy policy. We don't do that. This is what we call privacy by design. So let's go back up to, and there's a lot more. I don't want to, it's not a technology conversation this morning. And as my team tells me, Mark, you're not allowed to talk about our technology that much. So I did once in an interview, and they really got mad at me. It's like, you can't tell them that. You can't tell them exactly how we encrypt. So you guys can appreciate that because, you were telling me the same thing. I'm like, but you guys gave me the briefing. So what do we do? Privacy by design is one thing. Transparency and plain English are not always the solution, as we saw. Tim Berners-Lee talks about the Magna Carta, and this, I think, is really important, this idea of a Magna Carta, because the web, and this is what Tim said recently, he said the web's come under increasing attack from governments and corporate influence, and new rules are needed to protect the open, neutral system. So he says we need a global constitution, a Bill of Rights, for the web that we want. Now, this is a different conversation. The reason why I want to steer the conversation here is because we can talk about the problem. We can talk about, oh man, there's no more privacy. We can talk about, better ways, like the conference is doing, which is very important, of, identifying a security breach, of isolating a breach, of, different ways of protecting data, securing, things like that. But what we've really got to talk about is how do we transform the conversation about the right to privacy? How do we give technology its integrity compass? And this is a big question, and it's a big problem. Because, we've got to sort of alleviate some of the sort of ephemeral, nature of what's happening, and we've got to find a way to give integrity its integrity compass. Now, how are we going to do this in Washington, D.C., for example, when Sunday, if any of you guys saw this, on Sunday, two very prominent senators, John McCain and Lindsey Graham, said they don't even use email. I mean, did you guys see this? Like, they don't even use email, and they're proud of it. And these guys, so I always say, well, we can't have the white-haired guys running our governments decide what's good and what's bad. That's just not going to work. And then these guys proudly, right? This is 2015. Proudly get on TV and they say, email? I don't even use email. You got to be kidding me, right? So we've got to do something, and it's going to have to come to us. So, this is our sort of Magna Carta call. And what I want to do this morning is, 2 hours is a long time for a keynote, and I want to thank you guys for your patience as we sort of weave through the different parts of the problem and the conversation. Because really, I don't like to talk. I want to talk with us. I want to have a conversation together about what is it that we can start to do. How do we figure out, how do we help Tim Berners-Lee and ourselves, how do we start to, articulate this Magna Carta idea? Is it even possible? How do we, get ourselves on a track? And how, it's a very complicated question. Like, how can we decide what's the right educational app? How much time a kid should spend on an app? It's just fraught with pitfalls. But these guidelines, do we create guidelines for technology so that it has to protect privacy at a minimum? Do we create guidelines for technology so that it has to, not degrade the environment in a negative way? What do we do? Do we, how can we give this as a sort of Magna Carta to technology? And I don't have the answers. So this is why, but I think this is actually going to emerge in the next few years as the most pressing question and issue. And we don't want the white-haired guys that don't use email to create this Magna Carta. Also because, we know the power of influence. The fact that we're moving towards net neutrality and maintaining that is great. There have been some good decisions. That's because of people like us speaking out. How many of you, advocated in some way for net neutrality? All right, everybody in the room. And somehow our voices can be heard. So we've got to sort of figure out, we have to brainstorm. And we're like the CEOs of technology in here. So we've got to figure this out. Because it's not technology's fault. But we've got to figure out what the right pathway is for this idea, this Magna Carta call of Tim Berners-Lee. Let's go down to Tim. So what I want to do now is, let's open it up. Let me see how we're doing. Wow. I want to thank you guys. So that's the longest keynote I've ever given, by the way, because I really like to just interact. I'd rather sit on the stage and talk with everybody. It's actually a really fun way to do it because there's such topics, and I'll facilitate. So what I want to do now is open this conversation up. How do we let technology expand while having an integrity viewpoint that's not draconian? How to have net neutrality that's not biased and enhances life, protects privacy, etc. So let's open it up. And thank you very much for being patient, drinking your coffee, and listening to me sort of rant on about the different parameters of the violations. Great. And I think, is there a mic to pass around? Or we're probably small enough. You guys just yell out your questions, okay? Great. Thank you, guys. Okay, let's go. Can you stand up, please? Thanks. Okay, so the rule is, say that, stand up again, please, sir. And what's your name? Howard. Thank you, and thanks. So, sort of a guiding a rule, like, part of the Magna Carta, which would say, what? Right, right. That's right, and that's exactly what Tim Cook said. Do we have, Alex? I don't know if you're in the room, but do we have microphone a microphone that can walk around? Okay, great. So let's if we can, that's awesome. All right, who's got the mic? Okay, great, great. Are you going to be our runner too?
No.
All right. So who's gonna? Can we have somebody just sort of pass the mic around? So we got a guy over here, right? Who's next with a comment? And this way, great. Over here. Great. And here comes the mic. So it's a small enough room we can sort of walk to the mic
How
too.
about the speaker passes the mic to the next person?
Sure.
Great idea.
So-
And thank you guys. I'm glad we have a mic so we can all hear it. That's great. Thank you very much.
Maybe in relation to this gentleman's point, but more direct. If you're not sucking the blood out of my body and selling it to everyone and their mother, how is your product going to make a profit?
Okay. MeWe? All right. Are you asking about MeWe or in general?
About MeWe.
Okay,
and
yeah.
in general, how other products could follow that same model.
It's a great question. Let me see if I can pull up. I'll show you one. Let's see if we can get this. Get off the screen for a minute, so I can open up. It's all right. So we're locked on the screen. So I'll just tell you. So we have a patent pending advertising model that's patent pending around the world. We haven't launched it yet. We'll launch it in Q4, and it's does its best through proxy servers and everything else, and through the way you interact with it. That we have no idea. We have no idea what you're interacting with. It's a very simple premise, basically, without going too much into the IP. You just choose your ad. And you choose what you want. You go through a selective system. You choose your ad. We have no idea. The advertiser doesn't really know anything until you take an action. If you take an action to buy something, then of course you have to start sharing more data. And we'll give our members tools to scrape the data coming off their IP. But that's just part of it because we have storage. So MeWe's like a personal cloud. So at MeWe you share photos, videos, discussions, documents, privacy mail, chat rooms, voice messaging, and soon disappearing content. That's all in our platform. And you share that one-to-one in ad hoc groups or in formalized groups. And we've already seen migration of big Facebook groups coming over. And because we don't curate, we're not spying on you, we don't curate your feed, we don't do any of that stuff. But also, all your content is stored in what we call My Cloud, and you can buy up to 500 gigs. We also have an app store that's going to launch in Q3. So if you're a group, in addition to that, maybe you're a sports team. How many hockey players are in here? So, a bunch of, whatever your sport is or your kids' sports. We'll have about 10 sports teams apps in there. We have like a recipe book for, people want to share recipes, play date scheduling apps, all kinds of fun apps that are built over our API, that are approved by us, that are put in our store. For our members, this adds value to your life. The whole idea about MeWe is it's serving you. Who's the customer? I'm the customer. You're the customer. We also have a MeWe Premium, so we're going to compete directly with Facebook fan pages and Facebook groups. There's 500 million Facebook groups right now. So that's launching, actually that's our first enterprise product, and that's launching in July. And right behind that will be MeWe Office. Companies already use MeWe, but we'll have a dedicated MeWe Office product, and then next year in 2016, we'll be able to install MeWe behind the firewall in your company. So, and this is where, meeting with Chairwoman Ramirez, the FTC, it's like, yeah, you can make money without spying and scraping and doing so just, that's how capitalism has always worked. So I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Over here. By the way, that's my favorite question about MeWe. Is the first thing we ever did. The first day, March 2nd, 2011, we flip charted. That was our first meeting. All we did was talk about revenue.
Nick Bamington, freelancer.
Hey, Nick.
Hi. We talked last night.
Good to see you.
One thing that's been striking me in here, and a little bit related to this as well, is you're obviously a very well-established entrepreneur in Silicon Valley. You can defend your position very strongly. What about the young entrepreneurs that are out there wanting to build multi-billion-dollar companies, and the large VCs come in, and suddenly they start throwing the money in, and suddenly their stance on privacy gets thrown asunder because the VCs are going, you're going to be a billion-dollar company, you're going to make $10 billion, you actually need to scrape the data, you need to exploit that data, you need to sell that data, and the such like. What advice do you have for those younger entrepreneurs to stand their positions? Because their companies might just disappear because the VCs are like, we can't play this game.
You know, that's the billion-dollar question, right? It's and yeah, because I'm established, because Tim Berners-Lee is an advisor, because we put the poison pill in our privacy policy, that poison pill is for us and anybody who might want to acquire us. You know, if you're going to acquire us, if we're going to, you know, even for Tim Cook, if Apple, whatever, they have to play by our rules. So for young people, and this is what's happened. So, you know, Path was founded by Dave Morin. He was a Facebook guy. And he pivoted on privacy. One of the early successful companies that pivoted on privacy. But they weren't private at all. So they scraped data, they spied on minors, they did everything. You know, they got fined, you know, a big amount by the FTC. You know, and they're now, you know, their North American market has diminished, but they're still, you know, overseas, they still have a brand. Snapchat, you know, the thing that always concerned me about Snapchat, and I wrote about this before the FTC fined them a year earlier, listen, we're all technologists. I might not be able to know how to code because, you know, that's my choice is to have my engineering team. But I knew we could, you know, come on, this isn't rocket science. That picture shows up on your phone. It's got to land somewhere. That phone can't just, you know, it just gets buried down the layers. We can hack down and find that picture. I don't know why Benchmark Capital put $250 million in them and pretends that they didn't know. You know, I mean, really? How could you not know? You're the VC. You know, you're doing your technology due diligence. So this is a really great question. You know, hopefully entrepreneurs like me and others and Tim and people we can inspire. I've written a lot about this, about the opportunity of privacy, of something called conscious capitalism. And this is the whole idea of that it's almost like the convergence, like we're all ready for, you know, for the integrity, for the ethics. And, you know, this is where capitalism is great. So we can make a choice. At the end of the day, it's up to us to make a choice on what companies and products we use. Chairwoman Ramirez holds no hope out for real regulation around privacy in North America, particularly in the United States. Not real regulation with teeth. Because in her world, and this is really cool, the chairwoman of the Federal Trade Commission, Edith Ramirez, believes that we should be able to tell all companies to delete all the data about us, and that they would actually have to delete it. Now that's the second part of the question is, would they really delete it, and what server is it left on, and what data broker, and in what country? But at least there's an advocate at that high a position in America who believes that, you know, the right to be forgotten, even, you know, greater than the way it's perceived in Europe. I mean, that we should just be able to do that. I think what we have to do is show momentum. The privacy sells, like the question about revenue. I think we have to show momentum, and I think we could, turn the tide. It's a big project. Thank you. Great question.
Thanks.
Hi. So just to give a little background, I'm currently a student at UBC, and what I'm about to say is more of like a comment, and I'm interested on your opinion. So I feel like my generation, the generation that's growing up with all the social media, really just has no idea what these companies are doing with their data. And I kind of feel like a way to make this change would be to give education to the younger people growing up so they can make a difference. So I just was curious what you thought about this.
Yeah. See, that's really actually the perfect question and comment. That's what we talked about. It's, you know, if you knew that there's, you know, let's say a black hooded creep like following you around. When I wrote about these new super cookies, it's like, imagine, see, the problem is we can't see it. And because we can't see it, because there's this sort of ephemeral nature to it, we don't realize it's happening every second, every minute. And if there was a way to communicate this so that people really got it, because if you saw it, you'd be aghast, and you would never allow it. I mean, never allow it. But people that nest thermostats inside their homes. But if they really saw the data transfer, similar as this gentleman in the front row said before, when we first made this agreement with Gmail, for example, we didn't really realize the implications. So these are infographics. These are, as the privacy revolution gets momentum, and there are ways to create visual reality. I think it's helpful. There already have been videos and things like that, but I think it'll become more popular, more prominent. And hopefully, youth will actually create some great infographics, great videos. MeWe's going to do a big YouTube campaign. We're lining up Viners, all kinds of sort of content, really creative content. And right on MeWe's homepage is something called the MeWe Challenge, which is also fun. It's going to go viral. You just click the social media you're using, and it just pops up and tells you how many tracking cookies are on you. And people just go, whoa. So part of that is just giving that reality check. People don't know. How many of you guys know Facebook, and most of you probably do, how many of you know that Facebook is tracking us at 1,205 of the top 2,510 websites in North America? That's a staggering statistic. And, Facebook has data on us whether you're a member of Facebook or not. That's actually the other creepy part of it all. So great question, and hopefully, you can help. Yeah, create some great infographics. Send them to me if you want. It's Mark at MeWe. So,
Thanks.
Great. Next question. Yeah. Comments on how do we, in the back, there's a couple in the back. And let's stay with this. Let's stay with the idea, this whole Magna Carta idea. What can we do? Because we've got to, we don't want to be victims anymore. We want to come up. We're the technologists. We want to come up. We don't want to be the victims. Go ahead, in the back.
So good morning, I'm Marianne from Bit9. I have a question that's related to what's going on just with the world related to terror. And here in Canada, we're in the middle stages of passing a bill called C-51, which is all about invasion of privacy for the better of our society. And I think I'd like your comments about how there's this catch-22 about who determines what amount of information is for the betterment of our society, in other words, protecting us against terrorism, for example, or what is sort of free use and protection of our own privacy. And I guess my only other comment is we seem to have a moral compass on the internet when it comes to things, well, maybe this is naive, but to things about our tolerance for hate crimes, maybe child pornography. We seem to have a moral compass, but when it comes to a capitalist aspect, it gets very blurry. So I guess 2 points. One, how do we deal with this fear mongering in government to protect us, to steal our privacy or invade our privacy? And how did we get to a point where we do have a moral compass, where we move that line up a little better?
Let's start with the second part first, because the moral compass is tenuous, unfortunately. Like the cyberbullying, I'll just talk about cyberbullying. When cyberbullying programs go out to high schools, and cyberbullying, parents, kids, right, the data, 43%, nearly 50% of kids are cyberbullied. But they can't get a lot of momentum when they bring the programs to high schools, ask parents to come. Parents kind of turn the other cheek. They don't want to know, this couldn't be my kid who's the bully, or it couldn't be my kid who's being cyberbullied. And kids are often embarrassed and afraid to share when they're cyberbullied. They don't want to tell their friends. It's embarrassing. They don't tell their parents. Either they can't relate to their parents, they don't think their parents can help. They think actually talking about it could hurt them more. So we have, I think, like it's kind of like what you're alluding to, a semi-moral compass. It's like the new company Yik Yak, which is just another example of an anonymous app, or Ello, where you can get on them and supposedly they have some controls, but you can really trash somebody, and they get funded. There's capitalism at work. So we've got a lot to do there. Also, in this sort of, I think it's really a great point for the Magna Carta. We really have to identify things that are harmful. MeWe has a very clear terms and conditions, by the way. We don't allow. We say, MeWe's for law-abiding citizens. So, if you're posting gratuitous violence, pornography, things like that, it's a very clear list in our terms of service that this is not allowed. If we get a complaint, we reserve the right to investigate, and we'll shut it down. Because we really want, there's this power of good. We want to be for the good. When it comes to the larger question, right, C-51, so the challenge is, now how many people in the room are in law enforcement? Okay, one, maybe two. And listen, I love law enforcement. I love being protected. And, I think America's, my dad was kidnapped once. The FBI in America did a great job. This is a crazy story. We'll do that one over a beer. But the fact of the matter is that law enforcement serves a purpose. And they're here to protect us and protect society and help enforce the rules and regulations. And that's really important for us to be safe in this theater this morning. So at the same time, when you look at the data, as I quoted Mr. Dempsey, when you look at the amount of data that they're processing, they can find bad guys, and then they can target, like this, the Stingray, the dirt boxes. They don't need, the idea behind the dirt boxes was great. We're going to cell tower, and we're going to identify the telephone that we want to track, and then we're going to track that phone. We're going to track that guy. But in fact, what they did was just track everybody. So I think that with all due respect to law enforcement that's in the room, law enforcement just wants everything. Law enforcement also doesn't have that that data integrity compass. From my experience with law enforcement, law enforcement wants all the data, but we have data that shows that all the data doesn't actually help, and in some ways it's a hindrance, because then we have too many resources spread out in too many places watching. Is it helpful if you're watching 300 million innocent people when you're looking for a few bad guys that you already know who they are? No. So I think it's a great question. The problem is they sell us. Everybody wants to be protected. So the majority, if I asked, how many of us want to feel safe in our communities? Everybody would raise their hand. How many of us want to help law enforcement so that we can feel safe? Almost everybody would raise their hand. But we're being sold a bill of goods that's actually not true. They don't need that data. They don't need all of it. Our Constitution originally protected us from that and said that, in your own, you're private. Our Supreme Court has now said your phone is private. You can't just be pulled over in a car and they can look at it. No one can knock on your door without a warrant and say, give me your phone. But the phone company has all that data already. So we have to go one step further. So, I'm very concerned about things like C-51, the Patriot Act, which is coming right up against the Fourth Amendment now. The court cases are finally working their way through. So the next 4 to 6 years, we're going to see a lot of legal things. And we've got to protect our privacy. Otherwise, we're fighting to get it back, what's left. So that's, any other comment you want to make about that? Great. Thank you. Balcony seats, front row. And first of all, also, you guys see all these really comfortable chairs in the front? There's 40 of them. And I was told that some of these VIPs up here had very good, because it's TED week here, so you're probably all going out and partying. But today, everybody's wide awake in the front row. I was told yesterday that might not have been the case. So thank you, guys. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mark. Very good keynote. I was in Victoria at the Privacy and Security as well, and saw you there in the panel with the Facebook and Google and Twitter government relations guys, and you didn't really get to shine in that particular panel and the context. So anyway,
Thank you. It was an interesting position, just so everybody knows. There was a conference in Victoria a few weeks ago, and they had me on the panel with Facebook and Google and Twitter. I did my best to behave myself. So thank you.
Didn't pull any punches. Anyway, I work for the bank HSBC, and also with ISACA. I volunteer with them. And some of you may know, and you might have heard from Justin, we also spearheaded BC Aware, which is a privacy and security campaign. So personally, I'm very passionate about both privacy and security, and I work in the security sphere. Now, I really, really like what I see in MeWe, and I was, as you were talking about this, I looked you up and I looked at your privacy policy and your poison pill and so on, and you know, you've been a startup for some time now. Now I have kids, so I'm thinking, how do we get the next generation to be embracing something like this, which is so open in terms of privacy? You don't own our data. You say very clearly you won't sell it, you won't share it. You know, you're not going to spy on our friends and so on. As my kids, you know, look at us parents, the examples using Facebook, WhatsApp, and so on, that's all they know about, right? So what are you doing anything to get into the school systems and get to the kids when they're young, so that and get into and let the school administrations know this is the right way to engage in social media?
Thank you. Great question. Great point. And so this is actually our challenge, right? As you know, and all of us as innovators, is bring product to market. So we ran a beta project called Scruples, that Tim Berners-Lee joined. At the end of October in 2014, we announced that our real name is MeWe. We have not started to market, which is why, you know, if you hadn't been at this conference, you might not have heard of MeWe yet. Because of my belief, as we talked about earlier, that Bill Gates had it really nicely, but for the rest of us today in this world, we've got to deliver a great product. We saw Ello come out in September, move millions of people off of Facebook overnight, and their product was terrible, and they didn't even have apps, and it was an anonymous, it wasn't what the promise was. So what we're doing at MeWe is we're making sure that the product is ready. For example, if you register today in iOS, you can't search for me. You'd have to go on desktop. So member search will be live next week. We just pushed it to the store 2 days ago. So we're waiting till the product is really, really great, and we've got some really cool sort of Snapchat type features for photo sharing that are really, really cool. And then we have a marketing plan to go after the youth market and to go into schools. Yesterday I met with Jesse Smith here. So Jesse was here, and he and I met talking about how to get into schools. We also have a plan for a 1,000-member student privacy advisory board at MeWe. We very much are going to get students involved because, you know, you've got to be cool for the kids. You know, most of us in the room, you know, I'll say are over 30. So, and, you know, I'm sorry about that, guys, but we are. Oh, okay. But really, you know, our demographic, we've got to get the young market. And so, you know, everybody who works at MeWe is in their 20s generally. I think we have 3 people, you know, out of the 35 or 4 that are 30 and over, because we've got to really make sure that we've got that sex appeal. Part of it was that video. That video was shot in 11 countries, and, you know, there's 12 hours of footage from it, and we distilled it to a 1-minute video. The only thing left is to work a little bit more in music there. But we intend to get to, and it's 2 approaches. And you guys know this if you're doing anything with education. If we get to the high school or the principal, kids may not listen, right? Because that's almost like their parent telling them what to do. So we've also got to come in the other way. We've got to get the kids to really love MeWe. So there's some what we call the sex appeal that we're putting into MeWe right now before we go into our full launch, to make it really attractive to kids on college campuses, kids in high schools, to classrooms. It's a great tool for classrooms and for principals, just to say to their kids, hey, you know, you're going to use social media. Use something where, you know, cyberbullying is at a minimum. You know, strangers can't see your friends or your content. You know, we've done everything we can to put in things that will, you know, the 85% of changes that will minimize the opportunity for cyberbullying. But you can share privately, and colleges aren't going to see it. You know, your grandmother's not going to see it. Your employers aren't going to see it. And, you know, as a principal of school, I'm not going to see it, so I can get this headache off of my desk. We're working on it. Yeah, and we'll start a big marketing campaign in about 8 weeks. Also, just to speak to how we're funded, we've been funded by high net worth individuals around the world rather than going to Silicon Valley VCs. Part of our philosophy is that we wanted to have people from around the world invest in MeWe rather than just getting institutional money in Silicon Valley. Besides which, when I first moved to Silicon Valley in 2011 to start the new company, they laughed me out of every room I went into when I said privacy was going to make a comeback. So, true story. I mean, it was. I left a lot of venture capital meetings with my tail between my legs, thinking, you guys are wrong, but that's my job, is to show you that people are going to demand privacy, and part of it is simply education. We didn't know privacy was important until they took it away, and all of a sudden there's this thing called after the ecstasy, the laundry. So after the ecstasy of Facebook, there's the laundry. We're all dealing with the laundry now. The laundry is our data is out and around the world. Our kids' data will live forever out there. Parents don't want to share on Facebook anymore, etc. Let me see where we are.
Thank you, Mark. Look forward to that.
Great. So we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So let's, we want to solve. Let's see what we can do here. Because part of this is also taking care of our kids, right? Because we were all kids once. There's at the bar there. By the way, don't you love this venue where there's bars everywhere and you can drink in the middle of the day? So it's truly a hacker conference, right? Yeah.
Hi. Well, a lot of us here are pretty concerned with what our governments and other organizations do in our name. So we call for transparency in that sphere. And then we want privacy in our own sphere. So I think it might be the approach to take is to have a public, define the public sphere. Don't define what's private. Define what's public and kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
That's an interesting way to look at it. That's creative. That's out of the box thinking, right? Yeah. To define what's allowed to be public. Also, to somehow do for our college student over here to find a way to give better representation. Although even a warning on a cigarette packet doesn't stop a smoker from smoking. But we've got to find a way that's more graphic that people can really understand, and then maybe figuring out a way to define what's okay to be public. I think the right to be forgotten, the European Commission, if you guys followed the decision when they decided that Google had to, take down what you told them to take down in Europe, I think they actually went too far. And I was in a very awkward position as one of the leading privacy advocates saying the European Commission went too far, because if you've been convicted of a crime, then I think that's public domain information, and I should be able to discover that. If you're going to babysit my kids, if you're going to, whatever it is. But the way the European Commission, made the ruling, you had to take all that stuff down too. Google did. So there's this real question about what should be available to the public, what should be information about us that should be available, and what shouldn't be. And also, like you said, well, what should be scraped? But the challenge is that money, again, has no integrity compass, and money is influencing. Fortunately, this privacy conference, Facebook and Google, and other companies, Microsoft, Yahoo, didn't sponsor. But how many of you go to other privacy conferences? Show of hands. So, if you get out of, all right, and especially if you get out of Vancouver, these privacy conferences are sponsored by Facebook and Google, right? And this is why actually, the Online Trust Alliance, I know them, I was a member of them before, but we took the banner off of our site because really their whole board is Facebook and Google and Trustee. I know Chris Babel, the CEO of Trustee, but that didn't stop me from writing, a nasty article in HuffPost about, WTF, the New York expression. So, what are you thinking? So, to have a real conversation, an ethical conversation that doesn't have any other vested interest. And that's what I was hoping for this morning, and that's what we're having. And this is the kind of group together. We've got to figure this out, and then we've got to make our voices heard. So, because otherwise there's going to be this insidious, this is why Tim is talking about this all over the world. We've got to figure this out, and we can't have, you know, the money interests. If we can get this right, we'll figure out how to make the right money. You know, there's always a way to have a great company be a capitalist, this movement called conscious capitalism. But we've really got to crack this nut, and we've got to help the world figure this one out. So thank you. Any last question? Somebody in the back? You've got your hand up? Nope. Oh, great, right over here. And I'll be here afterwards, by the way,
So
guys.
just
Go
one
ahead.
quick comment. I'm just wondering, do you have anyone that's your, you know, I guess one way to get into social consciousness is to get it into the limelight, and often use celebrities or athletes or whatever. And of course, with all these breaches and stuff like that, do you have anyone that you've targeted that suggests that they might be able to be on board in helping you promote this belief system, not necessarily just the product, but the belief system?
Yeah. Great question, right? Because, you know, I'm a mature CEO. And so, you know, a 15-year-old's probably not going to listen to me. Probably not going to listen to too many of us in the room. So actually last night I was meeting with a bunch of the TED participants talking about exactly this, meeting with some big-time music producers. We know there's people like Ashton Kutcher who are investing in privacy. So we're very much looking at, you know, I consider myself to be the integrity compass of our company. And then we really need to have our spokespeople in the trenches. I've just been interviewed by Psychology Today. We're looking at more mainstream press. It's great to publish an article in Info Security, but you know, that means that all of us are reading Info Security. So it's not getting the message where it needs to go. Even HuffPost, you know, doesn't really get the message where it needs to go. So we're very much looking at this. Yeah, and we're also, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to run content marketing campaigns through top Viners, top YouTubers, Twitter. We already have evidence that Facebook shuts us down. We had a blogger who wrote one blog about us a couple weeks ago, and we had 25,000 new members overnight, and Facebook immediately shut down the conversation. So, but we will, you know, do everything we can to popularize this conversation. Thank you. Great question. So I know. Anybody else have a question? Because I know. I think the next room is going a little bit longer, but we're good, and then I'll be here. So if you want to come up and talk, do you have a question over there? Can we do one more, Alex, or not? No? Okay, we're done. All right, Alex. Alex says he's the king. So thank you, Alex. No, it's all right. Let me just thank everybody. You guys have been really awesome, and this is such an important conversation. So what I really want is for every one of us and every one of you together to really take it to heart and to start to think about solutions and start talking about solutions, ways that we can change, because we're going to be changing. The next 4 to 6 years are pivotal. And so we're all part of this conversation. And, you know, when, you know, we don't have, you know, like Facebook and Google have a lot at stake because their whole models are based on data and the data brokers that we don't know, of course. So we've got to make our voices heard, and we can change this, because this is really about the people, and this is really about the future of life on Earth, and we can do this. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, Mark. We're going to take a few minutes to swap speakers, and we'll have Wesley Weinberg in a few moments. Great talk. Even a lot of these sponsors were actually coming in and be like, "Oh, this guy's great." Like, you know, they're not manning